You ever felt like you've been lied to about meditation? Do you ever feel like the marketing, like all the hype, or even what you thought the practice ought to be like was completely different from the reality you experienced? I'll be honest, if you're like most people, the answer to that question is probably yes. My name is Rob Phillips. Welcome to my channel. So, for today, what we're going to do is unpack 5 of the most common myths about meditation and kind of give you a larger framework to understand why these myths might have existed in the first place, but also how to move past them and to see kind of the deeper reality of how these practices will work for yourself. And my hope is that by unpacking these myths, you'll actually have a deeper understanding with your practice. You'll be able to align with it in a way that's more intuitive, that's more natural, and really see the type of progress and amazing results that me and my students have gotten from dedicating themselves to this work. Before we begin here, as always, if you enjoy this video, give it a like and consider subscribing to my channel. And finally, if you want to go deep into these practices and my personal methodology for getting the most out of them, check out my free course, The Embodied Mindfulness Method. I'll put a link in the description down below. And so the first myth that I'd like to discuss today is the idea that in order to practice meditation, you need to have perfect conditions. So these could be common expectations like we need a place that's completely quiet, we need a cushion that's completely comfortable, or we need some pretty altar, or all this kind of superficial stuff that makes us feel like this is the right place to meditate, or this is what we need. And so the reality is the more we attach ourselves to ideas of what practice needs to be like or what sort of conditions we have for the practice as being important, that is actually keeping us from the core work of the practice itself. And so, not to discount the value of having a good space, and of course, when things are quiet, that can help you to drop deeper in a certain sense. But for most of us, perfect conditions, whatever that means, are never really going to happen, right? There might be noise from traffic outside. You might be sharing a space with your family, with your friends, whatever it is. And we just know that life is naturally chaotic, right? Things are going to come up for us. Things are going to challenge us in terms of the conditions of our space. And so I'd like to reframe the idea of this so that rather than seeing the less ideal conditions in our physical space as being an obstacle, they can actually provide an interesting opportunity. You know, I can recall many times being on meditation retreat, which honestly is about as ideal as conditions can be. Even there at the retreat center, there will be days where the landscapers are working. Maybe there's a lawnmower, there's a leaf blower. For a few years, the center I used to practice at, Insight Meditation Society, was actually doing long-term renovation. So there would be hammering, there would be construction noises. The teachers there were really wonderful in pointing out the idea that rather than seeing these as obstacles, these are opportunities. Because when the mind is stimulated by something that we see as being less than ideal, that is where we can notice our reactions. That is where we can notice how the mind is responding to these raw inputs. And really, mindfulness and meditation is about working with whatever shows up and learning to detach ourselves from these conditioned patterns. So if you can allow yourself to just sit and be with the sound of the leaf blower, be with the sound of traffic, whatever it is, you're actually training your mind in equanimity. You're training yourself in this capacity to be with whatever shows up for you. And in fact, this is also training you for better mindfulness in your daily life. So, you know, we tend to think of practice as being confined to these really formal settings where we're sitting still, we're doing traditional meditation. You can be mindful just about anywhere. And there's actually infinite micro practices you might find throughout your day. So if you commute, if you drive in a car, when you're stopped at the light, you can pause, you can notice that. You take public transit while you're waiting for the train, the bus, whatever it is, you can pause and notice that. Waiting in line at the store, all these opportunities where people normally reach for a distraction can become a chance to connect more deeply with your experience in that moment. And so, in fact, in many ways, learning to see your practice as an all-terrain practice, something that's not confined to ideal conditions, can be immensely powerful. Having said all that, as a final point, of course, to whatever degree is possible, do set up a nice space for yourself. I have this practice room here where I have my mats, I have my cushions and things like that. So there's nothing wrong with that. But the challenge is to make sure you don't get attached to it, right? To be able to work with whatever conditions do show up so that over time you can develop these deeper skills of equanimity. And so the second myth that I'd like to discuss is the idea that somehow meditation practice is about silencing your thoughts or making the mind completely quiet and placid. And this is probably one of the most common ones I come up against, especially with newer students. They tell me, they tried to meditate and their thoughts were just racing. They tend to think that if they can't silence their mind, they're not doing it right or something is wrong. The reality is that while on some level over time, meditation does lead to a more quiet mind, this isn't a complete myth. The process to get there is actually not about silencing the mind at all. It's actually not about trying to take control of the mind in any sort of a direct way. The thing is that the silence, the stillness is actually already there. Practice becomes a way to notice the space you already have, and over time, much like the first one, to decondition your normal patterns so that the silence can present itself more and more. And so I know this one is especially pervasive. I can actually recall my first mini meditation retreat. It was just a 6-hour kind of afternoon workshop. And I remember going to my teacher saying I was extremely frustrated that I was looking forward to this retreat, that I thought that it would be so relaxing, so calming, and my mind was just spinning. I couldn't drop into it. And my teacher kind of smiles and says, "Sounds like you had a really fruitful retreat." I look back on it and I get that he was actually giving me some wisdom there. So the first step towards finding silence is not trying to find silence. It's actually noticing that the silence isn't there. When we can connect and notice the rambling patterns of our mind, when we can be aware that we are lost in our thoughts, that is pointing to the fact that there is this kind of more frenetic energy, that the mind is not resting in that natural sense of stillness. And so a better practice, rather than trying to silence your mind or rather than trying to use effort or brute force, is to be aware of these patterns, to notice what comes and goes. This is where using an anchor can be immensely powerful. We can come back to feeling our body. We can come back to feeling our breath. We can let the thought go. It's still there. It might come back, but we can return to something tangible. Yin yoga is huge for this, and combining that with meditation is even more powerful. If you want to go deep into that, I would highly recommend checking out my free course. I give lots of instructions on how to work with that. And so if we can decouple ourselves from this idea that the mind needs to be silent, it's actually in this letting go of the attachment to the ideal that the mind can find that space. And you'll start to notice these little pauses. You'll start to notice the gaps between your thoughts. And the more you can take time and make space to unplug, the more you can take time and make space to slow down, that is where those ripples, that turbulence will have a chance to calm down. You'll have a chance to notice the stillness that is already there, not as something that you are creating through practice, but as an opportunity to reconnect to something that is already there for each and every one of us. And so the third myth that I'd like to discuss today is the idea that meditation is only for relaxation, or that we should always feel relaxed when we are meditating. And so, like all these myths, there is a kernel of truth here. On some level, meditation can bring us to relaxation, and finding a certain sense of stillness and calm is a part of the meditative process. But to say that we should always feel relaxed, or that the purpose of meditation is to relax, is really kind of misunderstanding things. And so in the Buddhist framework, which is where I draw most of my teaching from, relaxation is one of two sides of the coin here. So we have the idea of shamatha, which is the idea of concentration, of stillness, bringing tranquility to the mind. But we also have the other side of that, which is vipassana, which is the capacity or the ability to notice our experience on a moment-to-moment level. And so some schools of thought teach these separately, but I really feel like they're two ideas that are happening at the same time. And so if you find yourself in your meditation session and you're noticing those restless thoughts, or you're noticing discomfort, that's actually not a sign that you're on the wrong path. It's actually a sign that you are paying more attention, which is one of the things we want to get out of our practice. We want to see our actual reality more clearly. So where does relaxation come into the picture? Well, relaxation, or this ability to be more calm and more clear, is what balances the more turbulent aspects of that vipassana side of the equation here. And so this is where using an anchor can be really valuable. We can come back to, for example, feeling our breath or feeling the body. It's where using a practice like yin yoga, where we get that physical relaxation, can be really powerful. So it's not that relaxing is a problem, or it's not that it's not a part of the process, but where we can kind of go down the wrong path is where we feel like every meditation needs to be relaxing, or if we are not relaxing, we are somehow doing it wrong. In many ways, when you see things more clearly, that is revealing that the mind is kind of unpacking its layers. Little by little, as you untie the knots, little by little, as you develop this ability to let things come and go, that leads to a state of equanimity. Equanimity is the ability to be with whatever is showing up without getting swept up by it, without getting lost in the content of it. And in many ways, that is more relaxing than the sort of temporary quick fix or this kind of like superficial version of relaxation that so many of us carry. Meditation is deeply liberating. Meditation is deeply calming, but only when we allow ourselves to work through those more challenging parts. Only when we stop fighting against or even getting discouraged when things are more challenging. Meditation is this idea of letting things be without resistance. And that is an even deeper form of relaxation than kind of the myth would have us believe. And so the fourth myth that I'd like to unpack today is really kind of tying all of these last few together. And that is the myth or the idea that enlightenment or awakening is some sort of far off and mystical state. And so, of course, the paradox here is that on some level, yes, enlightenment, awakening, whatever word you want to use to describe this is wonderful, and it is rare. It is not a common occurrence. At the same time, the paradox behind this is that awakening is actually extremely natural. And I would go so far as to argue, and I'm certainly not alone in this view, that awakening is something that we already have. It's not a new destination that we're trying to get to. It's not some mystical state that we achieve over time. Awakening is our natural state, and our practice becomes a way to see that more clearly or to uncover it. And so where we can get the most value from this myth is when we understand the idea that if we are seeking something in our practice, if we are trying to get somewhere other than when we already are, that is a guarantee that you are on the wrong path. How could we awaken to anything other than to our actual reality, than to our actual experience? If you're trying to get somewhere different than where you already are, you're just moving into a different dream. You're not actually waking up, right? And so a better way to look at this is awakening is already here. Awakening is kind of a fundamental quality of our mind. The problem or the work that needs to be done is to unpack and untangle our conditioned patterns. And so this is where this practice of letting go, this practice of settling into the natural quiet and stillness that I've talked so much about, can be immensely valuable. We learn to see that the distractions, the resistance, all of the things that kind of give us stress, make us feel less connected in life, are not something that we need to eliminate or not something that we need to transcend. They're just kind of clouding over a deeper stillness that is already there. So that over time, with practice, these patterns become less conditioned. And over the years, if we practice more and more, we'll get more and more glimpses of this. We'll see this for ourselves. We'll start to have faith and trust in the process. Now, I just want to kind of frame this by saying I do not claim to be fully awakened. I am still kind of in this journey myself. So please don't misunderstand me. I don't claim to be enlightened. I don't claim to completely understand this in the way that somebody who's truly experienced it has. But again, I've had enough glimpses over the years. I've talked to enough very experienced practitioners, and I've seen in my students this possibility that awakening is natural, and awakening is not some far off goal. It's really already here. And the more we can trust in the process, the more we can just dedicate ourselves to the simplicity of practice, the more we'll be able to kind of believe that and experience it for ourselves. And so the fifth and final myth that I'd like to discuss and unpack today is the idea that awakening or deep meditation is somehow only for monks, somehow only for ascetics or kind of deeper spiritual practitioners, as opposed to something that everyday people like you and me can work with or achieve. And so I want to tell you that having taught these practices for over 15 years, practiced them for almost 20 years myself, nothing could be further from the truth. I've met so many deeply awakened people that were not monks, that were living their daily lives, that have just kind of dedicated themselves to the practice. And again, as I said in the last section, I do not claim to be fully awakened, but I have gone through the journey of meditation. I feel like I am a completely different person in many ways than when I first started. And through that time, I had periods of more intense practice. I had periods where I was certainly dedicating myself to it, but I was living a normal life. I was in Western modern society, using the internet, doing kind of all the normal things that, we expect normal people to do, right? And so I think the more we can detach ourselves from this idea that, again, conditions need to be perfect, or that enlightenment is some magical special state, this ties it all together with the idea that awakening or deep meditative practices are something anybody can do. Yes, we may require dedicating more time than is typical. We may require periods where we're really kind of leaning into these practices, but they're not the sole realm of monks. You don't have to go meditate on a hilltop or in a cave for years to achieve these states. Maybe that will accelerate things. I'm not entirely sure. I personally tend to believe that the more we can learn to work with actual life, right? The more we can be in this world, dealing with our normal frustrations, the normal challenges that come for all of us. This is really where the practices can not just be more valuable for navigating that, but they can maybe even be more transformative. So rather than feeling like you need to escape, or rather than feeling like you need to kind of become a different person altogether in order to receive the benefits of these practices, it can be completely empowering to appreciate the idea that anybody can do this work. And in fact, anybody should do this work. And that's one of the reasons why I share this content on my channel, one of the reasons why I'm out there as a teacher helping to guide people on the path. And so again, if you want some help with that guidance, I do highly recommend the free course down below, or send me a message if you want to know more. I could even work with you as a private student if you want to go even deeper. And so as we come here to the end of the video, I hope you're starting to notice some of the common themes that tie all these myths together. You know, the more we put meditation on a pedestal, or the more we think that meditation requires some sort of perfect conditions, the further we get away from the truth that meditation and mindfulness is about deeply connecting with and experiencing our reality just as it is. Anybody can do these practices, and you could do it right here in this moment. You could start right here and right now. And so that is why I wanted to make this video. I wanted to kind of pull away some of the veil, some of the illusions, and bring the idea of mindfulness and meditation back to what it really is, which is a chance to find a more deep connection with your actual reality, just as it is. And so, are there any myths that I didn't cover that you wish I had? You can let me know in the comments. Of course, there as well, if you have any questions or just anything you'd like to share about your experience, please do let me know. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like. And if you are not already, subscribe to my channel. I'm going to keep discussing these themes, keep going deeper into these ideas of meditation and mindfulness. Finally, as I've mentioned a few times, if you do want a deeper dive, please check out my free course, The Embodied Mindfulness Method. The link is down in the description below.